Welcome to All Sorts Podcast. We are all about journeys of discovery, and today we're setting sail for the world of Vikings.
We're going on a voyage that will really challenge how you think about them.
You probably picture, I don't know, fierce warriors with horned helmets, right?
Right, but there is so much more to Vikings.
We're going deep into their history and culture.
We'll sift through sagas, we'll look at archaeological finds.
And we're going to uncover what makes the Viking Age so captivating. What do you think?
I think it's going to be a really fun journey. You'll see that Viking culture was complex and, honestly, pretty nuanced.
Okay, so,
Yep.
we've got all these sources laid out, right?
Historical accounts, archaeological findings, even some linguistics.
So, what's our mission here?
Let's separate the myths from reality and bring the Viking Age to life for our listeners.
Perfect. So where do we even, begin?
A good place to start is by addressing a common misconception. The idea that every Scandinavian during the Viking Age was a Viking, meaning a raider.
Wait, so not everyone was sailing around, pillaging, coastal towns and stuff?
Exactly.
Mm.
The word Viking actually comes from the Old Norse word vik, and
Okay.
it means bay or inlet. So Viking basically meant one who goes raiding in a bay.
Interesting.
It refers to the act of raiding, not an ethnicity.
So it was more of a profession?
Yeah. Most Scandinavians during the Viking Age were peaceful farmers, craftsmen, traders.
They were just, living their lives.
Right. They built homes, farmed the land, traded goods, much like societies in other parts of Europe at the time.
So then why do we call it the Viking Age at all?
Because the impact of these seafaring raiders, explorers, and traders really defined this era.
Okay.
So the Viking Age, it spanned roughly from the late 8th to the late 11th centuries. It was a time of incredible expansion. There was all this international contact. And it was driven by, yes, those Scandinavians who did venture out.
Their long ships, they were able to travel, vast distances, right?
Absolutely.
So they connected Scandinavia to the whole world.
They voyaged from, think about this, the icy fjords of the North Atlantic to the markets of Constantinople.
Wow.
And even across the Atlantic to North America, way before Columbus.
That's insane.
And it was this international contact that made the Viking Age stand out.
It's incredible to think they reached so many places.
Mm-hmm.
But, what fueled all this expansion? Was it just like we see in the movies, a thirst for plunder?
While raiding was definitely part of their story, the motivations for Viking expansion were much more complex.
Yeah.
Population growth, we have to consider technological advancements, a thirst for wealth, and even the political dynamics within Scandinavia. All of these things played a role.
Yeah, okay, let's break all of that down. I can see how a growing population would lead to a need for, more resources,
Right.
especially in a climate like Scandinavia's.
Right, exactly. So the Vikings were really good at ironworking.
Okay.
This allowed them to make better tools for agriculture, which increased food production, and then that, in turn, led to a population boom.
So it was like a domino effect.
Yeah.
Better tools, more food, more people.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they had to look beyond their own borders,
Hmm.
for more resources, more opportunities.
Precisely. And at the same time, there was this allure of wealth and trade.
Mm.
The Vikings were drawn to these, really big trade centers of Europe, places like Dorstad, Quentovich, which were bustling with exotic goods, silver.
Oh, I see. So it wasn't just about, survival. They were ambitious,
Yes.
seeking their fortunes.
Right. Imagine a Viking trader coming home with silks from the east or silver from the Frankish kingdoms.
That'd be huge.
It would bring them prestige, wealth, which of course led to even more exploration and trade.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
Now, what about conflicts within Scandinavia itself?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't that have pushed some to seek their fortune elsewhere?
Definitely. There were power struggles, rivalries between chieftains. Aspiring kings may have gathered their followers and looked for opportunities abroad. That could be through raiding or even establishing settlements somewhere new.
So it's this really interesting mix of pressures and opportunities that put the Vikings on the world stage, driven by necessity, ambition, and, I don't know, maybe even just a sense of adventure.
Totally. But they couldn't have done any of it without their mastery of shipbuilding and seafaring.
Oh, absolutely. Those long ships, so
Mhm.
sleek, so sturdy, technological marvels for their time.
Perfectly adapted to their ambitions.
Let's talk about these ships. They're so iconic. What made them so special?
Well, their construction was unique, clinker-built, The planks of the hull, they overlapped.
Right.
This made them both strong and flexible, so they could withstand the North Atlantic, but also be maneuverable in shallow water, like in coastal waters and rivers.
So they could navigate the open seas and then sneak up rivers to raid settlements inland.
Exactly. They had a huge tactical advantage.
Wow, that's brilliant.
And their shallow draft, it meant they could just land on beaches, unload quickly, and disappear just as fast.
Like maritime ninjas.
Exactly. Really effective for those hit-and-run raids.
And their square sails.
Yeah.
Harnessing the wind to, propel them across vast distances.
Oh, and they even had this special spar called a betas. It allowed them to sail against the wind.
Really?
Yeah. Made them very efficient for exploration and trade.
They were so much more than warships. They were symbols of, Viking ingenuity, adaptability.
Yes. It enabled their expansion, shaped their destiny.
Their longships allowed them to be the ultimate explorers, traders, and, raiders of their time.
Yeah.
But to understand the Vikings, we need to go deeper into their society, right?
Absolutely. A world with its own complex social structures, and surprisingly, maybe, a place where women held a remarkable amount of freedom.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. I always imagined, a rigid patriarchal society.
Yeah.
But I'm ready to learn something new. Let's uncover the truth about Viking society and see how it compares to other cultures of their time.
So Viking society, much like many societies in the Middle Ages, was structured around a hierarchy.
Okay.
There were three main classes: thralls, carls, and jarls.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for me. Who were the thralls?
Thralls were at the bottom of the social ladder. They were slaves,
Oh, wow.
captured during raids or born into servitude.
Mm-hmm.
They did a variety of tasks: backbreaking labor on farms, constructing buildings, all sorts of things.
Slavery in Viking society. It's a side to this culture we don't often hear about.
Yeah, it's an uncomfortable truth, but important to acknowledge. And the archaeological evidence is pretty grim.
Really?
Yeah. There are instances where thralls were buried alongside their masters, likely sacrificed to accompany them in the afterlife.
That's intense.
Yeah.
And a little bit disturbing. So that paints a pretty bleak picture of the inequalities that existed back then. But what about the other classes? You mentioned the Carls and the Jarls.
Right. The carls were free peasants, the backbone of Viking society, really.
Okay.
They owned their own farms, their livestock, they worked the land, provided food for their communities.
So like the solid foundation,
Exactly. And then at the top, you had the jarls.
the elite.
Yes, the aristocracy. They were wealthy landowners. They had impressive longhouses, vast estates. They had a lot of thralls to take care of their needs.
Okay.
And they were the ones who held the political and military power, led expeditions, made decisions that shaped their communities.
So you had a very clear hierarchy then. Thralls at the bottom, Carls in the middle, and the Jarls at the top. Was there any chance for social mobility? Could a Carl ever become a Jarl?
It was possible, but probably pretty rare. Success in raiding or trade, that could bring you wealth, prestige, and sometimes maybe through sheer cunning or bravery, a Carl could gain enough support and rise to a position of leadership.
So there was a glimmer of hope for those who wanted to climb the social ladder.
Yeah.
Now, earlier you mentioned that Viking women had a lot of freedom.
Yes.
Can you tell me more about that? It's hard to imagine a society that had slavery also being progressive about gender roles.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? Viking society was definitely hierarchical. They relied on slave labor. But at the same time, they gave women rights and freedoms that you didn't see in many other parts of Europe back then.
Wow. Okay, so what kind of rights are we talking about?
Viking women, they could own property.
Really?
Yeah, and they could inherit wealth. They could even initiate divorce.
No way.
They weren't confined to just domestic duties. They participated in trade, they managed estates, and some even played roles in religious rituals.
That's incredible. That really changes how I think about women in that time period. What kind of evidence do we have for all of this?
Well, the evidence comes from different sources.
Oh.
Archaeological excavations have uncovered female graves, some containing really rich goods, which suggests that these women held positions of wealth and status.
I see.
And the rune stones.
Oh, right. Those beautifully carved stones.
Yes, they often commemorate women alongside men, highlighting their contributions to society and their families.
So these runestones, they're like ancient biographies giving us little glimpses into these individual lives.
Exactly.
Are there any specific examples from the runestones that, really stand out?
There's one in Sweden that tells the story of a woman named Estrid. She managed a vast estate all by herself after her husband died.
Wow.
And it speaks of her intelligence, her strength, defying the idea that women were passive figures in this society.
That's so cool. Really challenges those assumptions about gender roles.
Yeah.
Now, let's get back to the raids that made the Vikings, both feared and famous. Were they just about plundered? Or is there something more to it?
It's true that Vikings are often portrayed as bloodthirsty barbarians,
Yeah.
driven only by greed.
Right.
But like always, the reality is more complicated.
Okay.
Yes, the desire for wealth and resources was definitely a factor, but some of the earliest recorded Viking raids, they were actually targeting religious institutions.
Like churches and monasteries.
Yeah, like the famous attack on Lindisfarne in 793 CE.
Lindisfarne, the monastery, on that small island off the coast of England. Why attack a religious center?
Well, monasteries, especially the wealthy ones like Lindisfarne, they were seen as easy targets. They held religious significance and often housed valuable treasures.
That makes sense.
Easy pickings.
Exactly. And don't forget, Vikings were also skilled strategists.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So they weren't just, mindlessly hacking and slashing their way through villages.
Right, there was a method to the madness.
Yeah. Their raids, they were often meticulously planned. They used their seafaring skills, their knowledge of coastal geography to their advantage. They would strike quickly, use the element of surprise, and then disappear back into the sea before anyone could react.
Those long ships, designed for speed and maneuverability, would have been perfect for that, right?
Absolutely. The long ships allowed them to navigate rivers so they could penetrate deep inland, reaching targets far from the coast.
Clever.
They were a formidable force.
They sound unstoppable. But it's important to remember, a lot of the historical accounts of these Viking raids, they were written by their victims.
Oh, right. People who probably saw them as barbaric heathens.
Exactly. So those accounts, they might be colored by fear, by prejudice. They probably emphasized the brutality, maybe even exaggerated things to make the Vikings seem even worse.
Makes sense. To demonize them.
Yeah, paint them as enemies of Christendom.
So the reality of the raids might be different from how it was recorded.
Right. While we should acknowledge the violence, we can't simplify their motives.
We need to look beyond just good versus evil.
Exactly. To understand the Vikings, you have to see the complexity of their actions within their historical context. But let's move on from the raiding for a bit. Let's talk about another fascinating part of Viking history. Their incredible voyages of exploration and colonization.
Yeah, because they weren't just raiders, right? They were explorers, pushing the boundaries of the known world. Their voyages spanned continents, from the icy shores of Greenland to the sunny Mediterranean. Tell me more about those journeys. Those Viking voyages, they were epic. I'm thinking about those settlements in Iceland and Greenland.
Yeah.
Imagine sailing across the North Atlantic in an open longship.
It took incredible courage.
No guarantee of finding anything but, ice and storms.
And amazing seafaring skills, too, of course. What's really impressive is that they didn't just survive in those harsh environments.
Right.
They thrived, adapted their farming techniques, built communities, developed unique cultural traditions, all in these really remote outposts.
It really shows their resilience. They weren't just fierce warriors, they were skilled settlers.
Yeah.
Innovators.
Absolutely. They could make a home in some of the most challenging places on Earth. And their explorations and settlements weren't limited to just the North Atlantic.
Oh, right. They went far and wide.
They established settlements in the British Isles, in France, even Eastern Europe.
They had a huge impact then on the political and cultural landscape.
I really did.
They left a lasting impact on all those regions. They really left their mark across Europe. Like the Danelaw in England.
Yes.
Viking law and customs there.
Sure.
For centuries.
Testament to their influence. And we can't forget their role in the formation of the Kievan Rus', that powerful state in Eastern Europe. It was really the foundation for modern-day Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine.
The Vikings were key in shaping the destinies of all those regions.
They were.
It's amazing. They were so much more than raiders and plunderers.
Right.
They were settlers, traders, rulers.
Yes.
They integrated into the societies they encountered, and they left this lasting legacy. It's incredible how their influence went way beyond Scandinavia.
It is. And speaking of their cultural legacy, there's the rich world of Norse mythology, a window into their beliefs, values, worldview.
Oh, yeah, their mythology, full of gods and goddesses.
Yes.
Heroes and monsters, epic battles, and mythical creatures. It's so captivating. What are some of the key figures and stories?
Well, at the heart of it all, you have Odin, the Allfather,
Hoga.
associated with wisdom, war, poetry, magic. He's often depicted as this one-eyed, bearded figure with his two ravens, Hugin and Munin. They bring him news from all over.
Right. And of course, we have to talk about Thor.
Of course, god of thunder, wielding his mighty hammer Mjolnir, protecting the world from giants, other threats.
Thor is a figure people still recognize today.
Yeah. He was a very popular deity,
Rightly so.
often called upon for protection, especially during storms, battles. He embodies strength, courage, resilience, classic Viking ideals.
And Freya. We can't forget Freya, the goddess of love, beauty, fertility, and magic. Such a powerful female figure.
Freya is fascinating.
I know.
Associated with gold cats, even the Valkyries.
Oh, wow, the Valkyries.
Yeah.
Those figures who choose which warriors die in battle and go to Valhalla.
Exactly.
Valhalla, that legendary hall, ruled over by Odin, where warriors feast and fight forever, preparing for Ragnarok.
The final battle at the end of the world.
It captures that Viking fascination with valor.
And a glorious afterlife.
It's a powerful image.
Ugh.
And these myths, these legends, they weren't just stories. They were woven into their daily lives, shaping their rituals, customs, art.
Absolutely.
Their mythology was how they understood the world, how they made sense of life, death, how they faced everything with courage.
And these stories, they weren't just passed down orally. Eventually, they were recorded in those Icelandic
The
sagas.
sagas.
Yes, prose and poetry. A glimpse into their history, culture, beliefs.
The sagas are incredible. They really bring the Viking world to life.
They do. Through them, we meet heroes like Sigurd the Dragon Slayer.
Oh yeah, Sigurd.
His tale embodies the Viking ideals: bravery, adventure, magic.
These stories, they've resonated for centuries, inspiring art, literature, even modern interpretations.
It's timeless, isn't it?
Something about the human spirit. Now, we can't forget about the arrival of Christianity.
Right.
This new faith, with its own beliefs and values, really reshaped Viking society, brought about lasting changes.
It did.
It's fascinating. The Vikings, known for their independence, their strong traditions, they eventually embraced a new faith. How did that happen?
Well, the conversion to Christianity, it wasn't a sudden thing. It happened gradually, over centuries, influenced by a bunch of factors. At first, it spread through peaceful missionaries, especially in Denmark and Norway. The kings there saw the advantages of aligning themselves with Christian kingdoms in Europe.
Yeah, new alliances, trade opportunities, even greater stability for their own kingdoms.
Exactly. And as Christianity spread, they built churches and monasteries.
Spreading the faith.
Right, introducing a whole new moral code. But of course, it wasn't always easy. Imagine the clash between, say, the beliefs in Odin and Thor and the teachings of the church.
Yeah, there must have been some resistance.
Oh, for sure. Some pockets of resistance, and the conversion was different in different regions. But eventually, Christianity became the dominant religion in Scandinavia, influencing laws, customs, art, literature.
So the Vikings, known for their raiding, their pagan gods, they became part of the Christian world.
They did. But it's interesting how elements of Norse mythology, pagan practices, they kind of stuck around.
They did.
They blended with Christian traditions. Cultural change is rarely a clean break.
Right.
It's more of a weaving together of the old and the new, creating something unique, something complex.
That's a good point. Cultures are constantly evolving, adapting, incorporating new influences. As we wrap up our deep dive into the world of the Vikings, I'm struck by their legacy. They weren't just fierce warriors or skilled seafarers. They were explorers, traders, settlers, even rulers. They left their mark on history, culture, language,
They really did.
even on our imagination.
And as you think about everything we've learned today, think about this. How has our modern perception of Vikings, often romanticized or demonized, how has that shaped how we understand their real history and culture?
That's a really good question. If this deep dive has made you want to learn more, check out the links in the show notes. Remember, like those Vikings, there's always more to discover. And if you want to join us on more voyages of discovery, subscribe to All Sorts Podcasts on YouTube and follow us on X, Instagram, and Threads. Until next time, fellow explorers.